Thank you, Kevin, for that very, very kind introduction. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Joanne. For the past 4 years, I've been studying art history and politics here at Oberlin College. And before I came to Oberlin, museum work actually wasn't even an option in my mind. I never considered how one would work at a museum if this was a feasible career. So these last 4 years, like Kevin mentioned, interning at the Field Museum in Chicago and the Metropolitan Museum of Art last summer was really a whirlwind. So I've known I was going to be giving this talk for a while, and I thought really carefully about what I would want to know about this exhibition before I was launched into the museum world when I came to college. So I wanted to talk about the exhibition itself, of course, but I also wanted to pull back the curtain a little bit. Exhibitions can feel mysterious, or at the very least they did to me before I started working at museums, almost as though they appear kind of just fully formed in the galleries. You don't really see the work that goes into it. So today I want to do two things. First, I'll introduce the historical and ritual context of the Korean Three Kingdoms period ceramics featured in the exhibition. And second, I'll demystify the exhibition making process to a certain extent, how research happens, how objects are selected, and what it actually looks like to build an exhibition from the ground up. There is a slight technical issue. I cannot go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Okay, so this is essentially what I thought creating an exhibit would be like before I started working on this exhibition. 50% selecting pieces, really drama, really glamorous. Wow, these pieces go really well together. Look at the aesthetics, I'm using my eye, all that kind of stuff. About 30% research and about 20% writing labels. Here's what it actually turned out to be like. It was 65% research, so a lot of me going through millions and millions of tabs, a lot of books, 25% synthesizing that research into labels, and then 10%, if we're being generous, selecting pieces. So the reason why this split turned out the way it did, is for a very practical reason. All of the ceramics in this exhibition lack detailed archaeological information, and the object files themselves in the archives offered very little context. So we didn't know which tomb they came from, who was buried there, or exactly where or when they were excavated. So I had to begin at the beginning. What are these objects historically speaking, and what systems, ritual, political, and technological, produced them? That brings us to this slide and this map. To understand these vessels, we need to return to the Three Kingdoms period, which is roughly from the 1st century BCE through the 7th century CE. The Three Kingdoms period marked a transformative era in Korean ceramic history as the kingdoms of Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla, which we'll see on the bottom of the map there, vie for control of the Korean peninsula. The Kaya polity, also indicated on the map, was a confederation of multiple polities on the southeastern half of the Korean peninsula that coexisted with the major kingdoms. There were significant cultural and technological developments as each kingdom developed its own distinct traditions while also absorbing influences from China, particularly with the introduction of the potter's wheel around the 1st century CE, which revolutionized ceramic production and allowed the objects in this exhibition to be made. A significant breakthrough occurred in the 3rd century CE with the development of high-fired gray stoneware, which replaced earlier soft, low-fired earthenware. These vessels required really high firing temperatures, making them the earliest high-fired wares in the world outside of China. And these vessels served both funerary and utilitarian purposes, with distinct regional styles emerging from the Silla and Kaya kingdom and polity, and the works that will be on display are of the Silla style, just in case you haven't figured it out. That's where the Silla kingdom is on the map, circled in the yellow there. So the process by which Silla vessel types came to be formalized is closely associated with the development of the use of ceramic vessels in Silla funerary rituals. So the main vessel types of Shilla and Kaya style pottery were used on a large scale during funerary rituals. These vessel types were established following the formalization of food rituals, and from the late 4th century, ceremonies developed that involved the deposition of a selection of standard vessel types within a wooden chamber in a stone mount tomb. These ritual ceremonies were important ideological tools for maintaining and legitimizing the power of the central elite in Shilla, which was still in the early stages of state formation. This diffusion of funerary rituals involving ceramic vessels and the accompanying spread of vessel types used in those rituals provided the foundations for the establishment of the Shilla ceramic style. Here's what intact tombs from the Shilla kingdom look like from the outside. They kind of just look like hills, to be honest. Now get ready to be blown away by my amazingly illustrated diagram of the interior of one of these tombs. Bam! Green on the outside represents what we saw here with the green on the outside of these tombs. And the gray circle underneath are the stones that actually form the stone mound. And then inside is the wooden chamber that contains all of the burial goods and such. Here's the inside of one of those wooden chambers. And here is the inside of a royal tomb that's currently being excavated that was created in the late 5th and early 6th century, which is when the ceramics in our exhibition were made. So now that we have an idea of what kind of spaces the stoneware in this exhibit come from and their ritual function, let's take a look at some of the objects included in the show. So these objects called 후벤 or 굽다리 접시, or if we translate it to English, pedestal bowls, were seen on the title slide of my PowerPoint, or at least the one on your guys' left was. Pedestal bowls are essentially shallow plates or bowls set atop a cylindrical or conical pedestal, often featuring decorative perforations. These vessels were influenced by Chinese vessels of a similar form and became widespread in Korea by the 5th and 6th centuries. The perforation patterns work to reduce weight, prevent cracking during firing, and enhance the object's form. They also suggest regional origins. So rectangular cutouts are indicative of a Shilla style, which is what you're seeing here, those rectangular cutouts. And triangular cutouts are more indicative of the Kaya style. Some pedestal bowls also include lids. Both of the examples seen here do, which could be flipped upside down to serve as an extra dish, which I think is really cool. Pedestal bowls have been found to hold fermented foods, such as soybean paste, red pepper paste, kimchi, which is a fermented cabbage, and also fish sauce. Here's a few more examples of a couple of objects we're going to include. There's handled cups on the right, which kind of strikingly resembles a modern-day mug, which reflects the drinking and ritual culture of early Korea. These cups feature a variety of minimalist forms and lots of different kinds of handles when I was looking through other examples online. The handle on this cup is quite small, indicating that the function was probably not for daily use, definitely probably for ritual function. And long neck jars likely were used for storing rice and grains, and feature rounded bodies and narrow necks that helped protect contents from pests and made pouring easier. The raised lip along the rim in this image suggests that there was originally some kind of lid on top of it. Long neck jars were widely produced from the 5th century onward in the Shilla and Kaya regions. Their smooth tapering necks also often include these carved wave motifs called palang, which isn't coming very clearly on screen. But there's these little squiggly lines, a lot of them, in between the 3 distinct bands on the neck here. And I went through a lot of different books and articles to understand these objects' form and functions, but at a certain point, I realized that understanding function and form wasn't enough. I also had to ask, how do we know about these objects at all? So the systematic excavation of 3 Kingdoms period ceramics began as part of Japan's expanding colonial presence, which lasted from 1910 to 1945 on the Korean Peninsula. Following the First Sino-Japanese War, Japanese scholars initiated modern archaeological surveys which intensified after Korea's annexation in 1910. As a result, the Japanese colonial government registered hundreds of archaeological and historical sites. However, while these excavations brought attention to Korean ceramics, they were fundamentally shaped by colonial objectives, with Japanese scholarly interpretations of Korean artifacts often serving to reinforce colonial narratives. Archaeological findings were selectively used to construct theories that emphasized Korea's dependence on external civilizations while downplaying its unique cultural developments. Much of their work was also used to assert that the Korean and Japanese races have common ancestral origins, that Japanese emperors ruled Korea in ancient times, and that Korean civilization itself was stagnant. This approach aligned with broader colonial policies that sought to diminish Korea's distinct historical identity while simultaneously legitimizing the Japanese presence on the peninsula. Archaeology and ancient history were essential in the process of national identity formation in post-colonial South Korea, yet the nation has been left with this complex archaeological legacy. So while the colonial period introduced excavation techniques and detailed documentation practices, it also resulted in the widespread displacement of cultural artifacts. This colonial experience continues to influence contemporary discussions about cultural heritage and national identity, as well as the repatriation of archaeological materials, highlighting the enduring impact of this challenging period. And considering this history, how did these objects end up here in Oberlin, Ohio? To answer that question, I need to tell you guys about the Ludlows. So Dr. Alfred Irving Ludlow, pictured here on the screen, and Teresa Elizabeth Ludlow played a significant role in both Korean medical history and in bringing Korean ceramic heritage to Oberlin. So arriving in Seoul, the capital of Korea, in 1912, which is during the early years of Japanese colonial rule, Dr. Ludlow served as professor of surgery and director of research at Severance Hospital in Korea, which is now part of Yonsei University, which is a very, very prestigious university in Korea. There, he performed approximately 900 operations annually and trained 45 Korean surgeons until 1938, when the Japanese expulsion of missionaries forced his return to the United States. Dr. Ludlow's interest in Korean ceramics began in 1913, when, according to a book that he published about 10 years later, a local boy brought tombwares to his home in Poland. The Ludlow's appreciation for Korean ceramics resulted in significant contributions to the Allen Memorial Art Museum's collection, including Lillian S. Ludlow's 1920 gift of 25 stoneware tomb vessels from the 5th to 7th centuries, which is the collection this exhibition is drawing from. So who's Lillian S. Ludlow? So this is an exact screenshot of what you'll see in the provenance section of all of the pieces that are exhibited when you go online to the Allen's website. Lillian Ludlow was the sister-in-law of Dr. Ludlow and donated the pieces to Oberlin, likely due to the family's close relationship to Dudley Peter Allen, who was an Oberlin alumnus and is also the Allen's namesake. Allen was also Dr. Ludlow's mentor at Case Western Reserve University, and Lillian Ludlow worked as Mrs. Elizabeth Severance Prentice's personal secretary, Mrs. Prentice being the founder of the Allen Memorial Art Museum and being married to Dr. Allen before he passed. After checking the archives and not finding any personal correspondence or other documents between Lillian Ludlow and Dr. Ludlow, it's assumed that Dr. Ludlow gifted these ceramics to Lillian Ludlow. Though I will say, here is a passage I found in the same book he published, I mentioned in 1913, talking about his ceramic collection. It says, the pottery of the Shilla dynasty is crude and of much less artistic interest than the Goryeo-ware. So though this is technically of a different era, this era came right after the Three Kingdoms era, the pottery of the Shilla dynasty and the Shilla kingdom share quite a few visual similarities. So it is entirely possible that Dr. Ludlow simply gave the least favorite part of his collection to his sister-in-law. With all of that context in place, we finally arrive at the last and smallest portion of my exhibition work, which is selecting and arranging objects. Here I am down in storage. Kevin took this photo. So when you walk around an art museum, when you look around you, you're seeing objects in cases, literally elevated on pedestals with this special exhibition lighting, and it gives everything you see this special kind of aura, in my opinion. Then you go down into storage, and it's a little bit jarring. There's objects from like hundreds or even thousands of years ago, just in a cabinet made of metal or just on a shelf, and you're handling them, albeit like quite carefully, but you're still just moving them around like it's no big deal, with no glass cases, no special lighting, none of that. So I remember my first time in a museum's storage area, I was completely shaken. So I just wanted to give you guys a sense of how it looks to be down in storage when we were selecting these objects for the show. So when selecting, we were aiming for a diverse range of ceramics. The photo on your left shows the objects that are going to be in the first case, and the photo on your right show what's going to be in the second case. So we went down into storage with a potential list of selections, but while we were down there, we actually ended up switching out a lot of objects we thought we were going to use based on, visual balance, the condition of the objects, and other factors. And then Kevin came up with this absolutely crazy idea of filling one case entirely with variations of the same style of ceramics. So that's kind of how that second case came about. It's all variations of a long neck jar. The aim being, when people look at that case, they can really experience the subtle variations in form and color and texture. So that's how the second case, which we didn't even initially plan for, kind of just happened while we were down in storage. One of the objects highlighted by another bright yellow circle for you guys was actually not in a very good state. There was some damage sustained to the base and a bit of a chunk taken out of it. And it's hidden here in the photo due to Kevin's masterful handiwork. He rotated it so the chunk was hidden from view when we selected this photo. So in order to make sure that this object is in exhibition-worthy condition, we wanted to get it conserved, and Kevin and I actually took it down to the conservators at the ICA ourselves. It's not back to us yet, but special thanks to the ICA for their consistently amazing conservation work, and extra special thanks to John Sale, the Allen's director, for approving the conservation and understanding the importance of peace. Now, there's still a few big questions left surrounding this exhibition, and a couple of issues left to address. First is colonial era archaeology and unequal power dynamics. Excavations conducted under Japanese colonial rule often lacked local consent, community involvement, or cultural oversight, and were structured to benefit the colonial administration. Korean scholars and local communities frequently had limited access to or control over findings, and large numbers of artifacts, including tomb ceramics, were removed from archaeological contexts and taken abroad during this period. Additionally, funerary objects carry specific cultural sensitivities regarding the disturbance of ancestors and display of funerary items. Tomb ceramics were used for the deceased, intended to remain in situ as part of funerary practice. However, many similar tomb ceramics are on display at museums in Korea. So the key for our exhibition, I think, is to be culturally sensitive in the interpretation for a US museum. There's also missionary involvement and a cultural and power imbalance there. The fact that the pieces were acquired by a missionary introduces its own sensitive layers, because missionaries often operated in contexts of economic and cultural imbalance, which could affect how objects were offered, sold, or exchanged, and the degree to which local communities had agency in the transfer of cultural property. There's also the issue of documentation gaps. Like I mentioned earlier, like many other artifacts excavated in the early 20th century, the ceramics in this exhibition lack precise site context and original burial associations. This can complicate responsible storytelling, contextual integrity, and research accuracy. So what next? What do we do with this multitude of questions? They're all very complicated and nuanced issues. Of course, we will work to highlight the achievements of early Korean civilization, pushing back against Orientalist narratives, but there's a lot more left to think about. With all of these factors to consider, how can we mindfully present these objects to the public? We don't have all the answers, but at the very least, by providing historical, ritual, and political context, I hope this exhibit signals the Alum's commitment to transparent exhibition creation, and that this exhibition encourages visitors to look closely, not only at the beauty and craftsmanship of these ceramics, but also at their original ritual use and the systems that brought them into the museum. Thank you.